The world of Thedas in Dragon Age is home to an almost unbearable amount of codex entries, books, and memoirs scattered throughout the lands. And it's because of this that oftentimes players will simply open up a lore entry in game, see it doesn't seem very interesting, and close it after 2 seconds, knowing how much more information dumps there is to come. In Dragon Age Inquisition specifically, the codex entry titled Request for Resources on the Fade would be one such example. That is nothing more than a list of books about the Fade. But for players that were paying especially close attention, they may have noticed the last 2 entries in this parchment that may just be hiding the biggest revelation the entire series has ever seen. The first book is titled Elvahan dis Falsis, Traiu Meta Drakas. At first glance, this isn't very helpful, as the language is written in what seems like gibberish, but the first word Elvahan is actually very close to Elvanan, which is the Tavine spelling for elves. For those of you that don't know, Tavine is the official language of the Tevinter Imperium and relates closely to Latin in our real world. So what happens if we try to convert this book title from Latin to English? Well, the first word we already can assume is Elven, but we also then can find out that dis falsis in Latin translates directly into false gods. Now we're getting somewhere. As for the second part of the title, Traiu can be substituted for Trae, meaning 3, Metad relates closely to Mito, meaning to mow, cut off, or reap, and Drakas most likely relates to the Latin Draco, meaning dragon. And when we put this all together, we suddenly have a title that is starting to make a lot more sense. Elven False Gods, 3 Cut Off Dragons. Could this book be a reference to the veil that was created by Solas that somehow cut off the dragons from their power? If your mind isn't blown yet, it's about to get a lot more interesting. Because as we already know from Solas in-game, in the Dragon Age Inquisition DLC, the elven gods of the ancient pantheon were most likely false gods that simply gave themselves the title in order to force the lower elves to obey. But what could the book's title mean by the 3 cut off dragons then? Well, as we already talked about in previous theories on this list, there's a lot of evidence to support the fact that the 9 elven gods or Evanuris may in fact be the same deities as the 7 old gods in humanity's faith, with the extra 2 elven gods simply being Solas and Mythal, who later were revealed to not actually be true elven gods at all. So who would this third dragon be then? Could it actually be the author of this book itself? After all, who in Dragon Age's lore otherwise would have known about the Evanuris, creation of the Veil, and Tavine, all with enough understanding to write an entire novel? Could this mean that there was actually a secret third member of the Evanuris or Elven Pantheon of ancient times that also disagreed with the group? And could this mystery member actually have been a dragon or old god along with Mythal and Solas that is playing a massive role in the story we still don't understand? Is it possible that an entire main character of Thedas' entire history has been forgotten and banished from all? And if so, why? What could this now enigmatic figure be hiding? And more importantly, could this figure in fact be the true identity of the one known as the Maker, who apparently holds all power in the universe? It's common amongst Dragon Age theorists to assume that Mythal, Sandal, or Solas is in fact the Maker, or that the Maker itself is nothing but a lie. But maybe there really is a strong force in this ancient story we have yet to be told about, and that force may just be at the center of absolutely everything going on in Dragon Age. And maybe that answer lies in the second book at the end of this codex entry, which simply reads, Untranslated, Author Unknown. It's crazy to think that the answer to everything in the entire Dragon Age universe may have just been hiding in what on the surface looked like one of the most boring lore entries in-game. The Dragon Age series is known for having very high highs, but also very low lows. Depending on who you ask in the community, many fans either love or hate each game and spin-off, with the only exception being Origins being almost universally loved. And this means that the fanbase is rife with both copious amounts of love and disdain alike. But one thing that the fans can all agree on is that any new mainline game announcement to the series is a big and exciting moment, and as one of the best-selling RPG franchises of all time, it should be for the entire industry. And that's why the upcoming release of Dragon Age Dreadwolf has so many people excited. But the real interesting discussions center around not when the game will finally release, but instead what it'll actually be about. We already know from multiple rumors and hints from trailers that the game is likely to be set in the Tevinter Imperium, maybe the most interesting zone in all of Thedas, and it's going to be centered around the main villain Solas. For those that don't know, Solas was revealed at the end of the final DLC content for Dragon Age Inquisition to be the famed Fen'Harel from the Elven Pantheon. Fen'Harel, also known as the Dreadwolf, Lord of Tricksters, and Bringer of Nightmares, was the man responsible for tricking the 9 original Evanuris and creating the veil that separated the Fade from the material world. This caused the downfall of the elves and their leaders and was the main catalyst for the structure of the world of Thedas that we see today. Solas saw his elven god counterparts not as gods, but as beings filled with hubris, many of whom would enslave their less powerful elven brothers and turn them into horrid monsters for sport and fun. But in his attempt to stop this, he also took away the world we knew before, and doomed many spirits to a life of torture. So in the Trespasser DLC for Dragon Age Inquisition, Solas finally reveals his new plans, to take down the Veil and thrust the world of Thedas into a new beginning, one where the material world and the Fade are as one, just like before. The issue is, this could end up killing all living beings on Thedas today and result in an even more tragic set of consequences that Solas couldn't have predicted. His intentions are pure at heart and make sense, but the actions he is willing to take to potentially right his past wrongs will only make things worse. Which, side note by the way, is such an awesome villain arc, which really gets me hyped for the next game. The real questions though arise around whether or not everything we are hearing from Solas is the truth. After all, we do know that he is the god of tricksters in elven lore, and was able to dumbfound an entire legion of capable adversaries. So maybe everything isn't as it seems. Could Solas be hiding some key facts from us about his real motives and intentions? He is making it seem like he is less sinister than he actually is, or could it be that other forces are at play that we're not yet aware of? As we noted before, considering that Dragon Age 4 is likely set in the Tevinter Imperium, this is also the perfect place to dive more into the lore of ancient Thedas and who Solas was and what he did, from sources like the Magisters, not just Solas himself. Where this theory gets absolutely crazy though is when we start to dive into who Solas really is. Because while we already know that Solas is Fen'Harel of the Elven Pantheon, what if Fen'Harel is actually more than just that? In a passage from the Tevinter Nights books in-game, we can read the following. High overhead, where the black city shadowed the sky, I heard a booming roar. But before the Tevinter mage could complete his ritual, the Dreadwolf arrived. It was no elf, no mortal mage. It was a beast unlike any I have ever seen, lupine in appearance, but the size of a high dragon, with shaggy spike hides and 6 burning eyes like a pride demon. And it came to us on wings of fire that resolved themselves into hordes of lesser demons as the Dreadwolf landed before us. But you may be asking, why would Solas or Fen'Harel be a dragon or demon? That makes no sense. Well, very unknown but canon amongst the Dragon Age lore is the Dragon Age comic series, The Silent Grove. And it's here we learn about what are called great dragons and dreamers. During the time of the ancient elves, these dragons were said to roam the sky freely due to the unhindered power of the Fade. And from these great dragons light a blood in the purest of form, that when combined into one's body could make them a dreamer, or a mortal with the ability to shape the Fade in dreams to their will. Sounds very similar to someone we already know, doesn't it? Somebody that somehow had the unbelievable power to create an entire veil to hold back the most powerful force of magic in existence, the Fade itself. We have another smoking gun too. In some ancient Elven writings in-game, we can also find the passage that links Solas to all of this. His crime is high treason. He took on a form reserved for the gods and their chosen, and dared to fly in the shape of the divine. The sinner belongs to Darathman. He claims he took wings at the urging of Gilinan, and begs protection from Athal. She does not show him favor, and will let Elganon judge him. For one moment there is an image of a shifting, shadowy mass with blazing eyes, whose form may be one or many. Then it fades. This would explain why Solas' parting words in Dragon Age Inquisition are that he and only he alone could have created the Veil, because Solas himself is the last of the remaining great dragons or true gods of the world that exist, that has the power to quite literally bend existence around his very will. Solas isn't just the fate god of the ancient elves, but one of the most powerful gods of the world of Thedas itself, living up to his new name as the trickster god, all in an attempt to regain lost power. It's one of the most interesting and lesser known theories in Dragon Age, but one I would especially like if it came true, because it's just too cool not to. In Dragon Age Inquisition's Jaws of Hakan DLC, there's a note the player can find locked behind a cell door that reads, "Long ago this would have been underwater, until Tevinter drained much of Swamp Kuldstatten to build this prison. Why make a jail so remote? For prisoners they wish to hide. Tevinter has made war on Orlais many times, but I now believe there is also a secret war between them that the common people are not allowed to see. This prison is a reminder of this secret war that continues in our time. I speak of Orlais's attempt to rouse the Snake Kings of the Earth against Tevinter's alliance with the Moon Men. This is experienced in Sir Yink's pamphlets, of which I have read many, which explain things such as why the snake appears in Tevinter's drawings and how the Snake Kings came to exist. Did Moonmen have their Tevinter allies keep the reptilian ones here so they could interrogate them at their leisure? None can say, but I will say yes, as that can fit my theory. While this entry is obviously a funny nod from Bioware to a real-world conspiracy theory that talks about lizard people and aliens, it starts to get really interesting when we realize that those Snake Kings being talked about here could actually be the Scaled ones. As we talked about earlier on this list, the Scaled ones are something that is still up for debate in the Dragon Age universe, but it seems quite clear from many ancient tombs of Dwarven lore inscribed by the Shaperit scholars into memory that they did in fact exist at some point, and may have held immense power. But if this conspiracy theorist did in fact know the truth behind the Scaled ones, could these Moon Men of Tevinter in fact be real as well? In another note we can find on Rockspit Island, we get more context. The Rockspit is an island of great significance. Its sides are steep, but the top is flat, and there are pillars and a dragon statue perched proudly for all to see. Would Tevinters put these items here for no reason? Nay, I believe they were meant to be seen from a great height, for rivers and islands would make a good landmark for a bird's eye. This island is obviously the place where Tevinter first contacted the Moon Men. This would explain why the river was clearly diverted from its original path in the past, as one could see if they follow the old riverbanks. Did Tevinter use the ley lines to do this? Did the Moon Men fly? Do they look like us, only grayer? Much remains to be discovered. So could it be in fact that the true founding of Tevinter was actually aided by so-called Moon Men? Maybe the magic and power that the original Magisters and humans that migrated to Thedas got was actually some sort of extraterrestrial beings, not the old gods. Or even more likely, this conspiracy theorist may be confusing the old gods with aliens. Or maybe all of the Dragon Age lore and the Chantry have been mistaking aliens as old gods. Could the dragons of Dragon Age themselves actually be interdimensional beings from outer space that are manipulating a world they have stumbled upon? Potentially this could explain how the elves found so much power as well. The Fade, the Void, Lyrium, Titans. What if all of it was nothing more than advanced alien technology that has fallen into the hands of otherwise primitive beings, and because they cannot understand it, they have come up with legends of gods and heroes to make it all make sense? Well, here's where things get absolutely crazy. What if the old gods and the maker of Dragon Age are nothing more than the Reapers from the Mass Effect universe, who are indoctrinating humans on the planet far into the future following the events of Mass Effect 3? After the destruction of the Mass Effect relays at the end of the trilogy, humanity would have been sent back into the Stone Ages once again, and some splinter groups may have found themselves on the planet that houses Thedas, where millions of years later, dormant Reapers can come back to study the beings that originally bested them in the first place. I'm not high, I swear. Probably the biggest events in the Dragon Age series are blights. Kicked off whenever Darkspawn find one of the 7 old god dragons underground and change them into an archdemon, the blights consume the world of Thedas and cast humanity into sometimes over 100 years of never-ending and bloody war. That is until the archdemon is slain. But in the actual series of games themselves, we've only seen one of the blights, the 5th and most recent. And what's weird about this blight specifically is just how much it differed from any of the previous 4. For starters, the previous blights all began under massive and populated towns, meaning when the first Darkspawn armies arose from the depths underground, they could quickly attack and cripple major cities of influence and weaken their foes. But for the 5th blight led by the old dragon god Orthemiel, Darkspawn originally started appearing far away from civilization in the Kokari wilds. Another example of the weirdness behind the 5th blight is that in all previous blights, multiple large-scale invasions were launched all over Thedas at once, ranging from Orlais to Tevinter and Ferelden. However, once again in the 5th Blight, only Ferelden was focused on, and even to a lesser extent in terms of the ferocity of the attack. On top of this, the previous 4 Blights were known to be massively detrimental to the dwarves, and in fact are the main reason to this day that they are so weakened. But in the 5th Blight, that completely changed, and the Darkspawn didn't even touch them, leaving their at the time exhausted capital of Orzammar utterly untouched. And this entire blight and war lasted literally under a year, while being stopped by a brand new recruit to the Grey Wardens, which is crazy considering other previous blights, like the one led by Dumont, carried on for over 120 years non-stop. So what's going on here then? Well, some in the Dragon Age community have begun to speculate that the Architect may have something to do with this. You see, in Dragon Age Origins, we learned that the 5th Blight didn't actually start like the others. The Architect, which was a Darkspawn emissary wielding great magics oftentimes theorized to be one of the Tevinter Magisters, had gained sentience and wanted to help his brothers be freed from the taint, and was trying to awaken Arthemiel in order to have him help in this endeavor. Apparently this ritual failed though, and after being awoken, Arthemiel became an archdemon and the 5th Blight started. Considering how weird the 5th Blight actually was though when compared to the previous ones, and how much of a failure it truly turned out to be, all things considered, could it be that the Architect actually did in fact succeed? Maybe Arthemiel purposely released the Darkspawn in the Kokari Wilds originally and only attacked smaller settlements primarily. After all, this is the sort of strategy you would commit to if rather than causing major damage, you just wanted to establish some sort of foothold in the area. Potentially, Arthemiel's real goals were actually aligned with the Architect's, and the old god did not want to cause tons of casualties like the previous Blights, but instead establish a base of operations and then look for peace. This would also explain why the dwarves were left completely alone, and also why in Dragon Age Origins specifically, when fighting the Darkspawn, they seem so organized, because maybe they were. Unlike previous Blights where they were nothing but mindless and dangerous husks following the will of the tainted Blight. This theory flips the entire beginning of the series on its head and shows that maybe the Darkspawn and the old gods aren't actually so evil after all, but rather beings that are being controlled by the mysterious Blight. And while there is certainly more to this story going on that we aren't aware of, for sure the 5th Blight in retrospect should have been a wake-up call for many, that something is changing. It's widely been accepted by most of humanity following the Chantry's teachings from the Maker that the Darkspawn originated from the 7 Tevinter magistrates performing a ritual to teleport themselves into the Fade, only to bring back with them a horrid plague that thrusts upon the world of Thedas the First Blight. But what if this actually wasn't the real story? You see, there's a lot of conflicting evidence from other races' histories as well as known facts about the world, like the discovery that many of the Darkspawn are being birthed underground from what are called broodmothers, which are massive, ugly beasts that spew fluids from every hole in their body while giving birth to whatever race they are, with different broodmothers being human, elf, dwarf, or Kunari. To get an idea of just how dreadful and rotten these creatures truly are, take a look at what might be one of the most horrifying poems in all of Dragon Age, from a dwarf named Hespith singing as she is about to go into battle with a broodmother. First day, they come and catch everyone. Second day, they beat us and eat us for meat. Third day, the men are gnawed on again. Fourth day, we wait in fear for our fate. Fifth day, they return and it's another girl's turn. Sixth day, her screams we hear in our dreams. Seventh day, she grew as in her mouth and they spew. Eighth day, we hate it as she is violated. Ninth day, she grins and devours her kin. Now she does feast, and she's become the beast. Now you lay in wait, for their screams will haunt you in your dreams. So could it be that the Darkspawn did not come from the magistrates, but rather are just a natural part of Thedas that were always deep underground, that being the broodmothers and the curse they carry? One especially interesting theory argues that the Darkspawn may have much more in common with their underground companions, the dwarves, than we thought. After all, we know the dwarves used to listen to the song, it was said, as we hear from Cole in Dragon Age Inquisition's Descent DLC based around finding a still alive Titan, when he notes that it's singing, a they that's an it that's asleep, but still making music. That music is what we hear about in some ancient dwarven texts, back when the dwarves and titans were much more connected. And as we already know, the Darkspawn are consumed by the Blight, but also the Taint, which is a voice and song in their head that instructs them to kill. Perhaps the Darkspawn we see today are actually the dwarves of old, or simply a new vessel from which the Titans are trying to get payback after the elves apparently defeated them in a great war millennia ago. Maybe even the brood mothers themselves are the Titans or working for them, and all of this magic relates back to them, the original owners of Thedas. Either way though, something is for sure going on here with the Darkspawn that we aren't yet aware of, and there's simply too many missing puzzle pieces as to where these creatures truly came from and why they're so prevalent in the Deep Roads. While the lands of Thedas and Dragon Age are no stranger to otherworldly and mysterious creatures that we don't know much about, maybe the most unknown of all of them is the Vex. Briefly mentioned by David Guider, the narrative designer and mind behind the setting of Dragon Age, at one point in an interview years ago, he talks about these strange monsters, where he says, "A primitive yet sapient race called the Vex has inhabited this island since before the Kunari arrived." So what is he talking about exactly? Well, we know that the Kunari are said to have inhabited Parvolan for at least 1,000 years before migrating over to the mainland of Thedas, and it's largely been assumed that humanity also lived on this island at some point with the Kunari before migrating over as well. But could it be that there was also a third potential race that settled there, that being these Vex that David himself has confirmed the existence of? If we take a look back at some ancient lore texts on Parvolan, we may just find some answers. Some scholars believe that the first humans in Thedas came from the rainforests of Parvolan many thousands of years ago, migrating south from the archipelago. The pyramids they built still stand to this day and are regarded by travelers in the region as true wonders. Elven lore also states that humans first arrived in Thedas around -3100 ancient from Parvolan to the north. We know more of the pyramids than we do of the humans who built them. Parvolan's distinctive pyramids, looming from the overgrowth, have remained largely intact, even if their intended purpose has been lost. An von Thrastus has observed that the shape of the Parvolan pyramids seems to perfectly match the constellation Solium. So it's clear that some giant and impressive structures and pyramids have been built on Parvolan, and most historians on Thedas seem to think these are from ancient human tribes or even the Kunari, whose ancestors seem to have a much higher level of technology than the rest of Thedas. But could it be that the Vex actually hold the key to this mystery? Let's take a look at another lore entry in game on the Solium, which is the constellation that was said to perfectly match those Parvolan pyramids. There are two common interpretations regarding the history behind the constellation Solium, commonly referred to as the Sun. The first is that it represents the fascination of early, with all objects in the sky, the sun and moon in particular. The second interpretation is that this constellation originally represents Elgar'nan, the head of the elven pantheon, who is also known as the eldest of the sun. If we narrow in on their first interpretation, we get more questions than answers. After all, what is the fascination with an early something? Could it be that it means early and lost civilization, potentially that of the Vex? And if that is the case, could that mean that the Vex themselves have some sort of relation to the sun and constellations, and maybe the Evanuris or old gods themselves? An even weirder theory is that the Vex may in fact be the real name behind the scaled ones we spoke about earlier on the list, considering both in lore and data entries date back to the same exact periods of time. It could just be the secret link we're looking for. Amongst the most degenerate in the Dragon Age community as well, though, some have begun to wonder if the Vex may in fact be a race of sentient furries, potentially foxes. Why? Because I guess it kind of sounds like a furry name. I hate it here. The Blight is maybe the most terrifying ephemeral force in the entire Dragon Age series. Its origins, at least based on Chantry doctrine, come from when the Seventh of Winter Magisters entered the Fade and approached the Golden City, only to release the contagion onto the world. But that's just it. First of all, is this story really even true? And second of all, is the Blight in fact a contagion? We know that the Grey Wardens in-game perform a ritual in order to gain immunity to the Blight and the Taint, but most interestingly, their methods resemble in many ways a real-world sense of vaccination or immunization. We also know that the dwarves of Kal Shirak have seemingly unlocked this ability to resist, and it implies that the blight is nothing more than a virus of sorts that turns its host into the darkspawn that fight under the will of the Song and Taint. This is also what causes some lyrium in the game to be turned into red or blighted lyrium, as it becomes infected with the same substance that turns living beings into monsters. But if the blight really is a sort of contagion or chemical weapon, where does it come from? Well, considering as far as we can tell from all accounts it was locked behind the veil in the Fade, maybe the blight itself is some sort of ancient, purposely created bioweapon. We know that during the time of the ancient elves in Evanuris, the elven pantheon also consisted of a mysterious and unknown set of figures called the Forgotten Ones, and in some lore texts throughout the series, some connections between these Forgotten Ones and the Void specifically have been called out. Maybe the blight itself actually originated in some part from the Void, and the Forgotten Ones of the Elven Pantheon were able to tap into it in some way to then pull the blight weapon into the Fade or realm of the God Elves at the time. This would mean that the blight was actually originally a way to take down the Elven ruler's reign, and potentially could even be a secret reason for why Solas created the Veil in the first place that he hasn't mentioned, in order to not only take away the power of the Evanuris, but also to hold back the blight that would have destroyed the world. This would also explain how the blight transforms old gods into archdemons, because if those old gods are in fact the Evanuris or Forgotten Ones, then the blight having such a drastic effect would make sense, considering it would have been engineered or formed from the Void with that exact intention. Maybe the blight and the calling or taint it produces for those infected is nothing more than an ancient and forgotten, massively powerful bioweapon forged in the ether of the Void, that when overpowering a host transforms their mind to be fixated on the call of its song and will. A song and will that may just in fact be the Forgotten Ones or the original creator of the blight, slowly transforming the world to do their bidding from behind the scenes in a master plan that is now taking shape over thousands of years.